Welcome to the Truth Over Comfort show. Today's guest is Richard Grove. He is the host of the Peace Revolution podcast, the Grand Theft World podcast. He is a documentary filmmaker. He runs a course called Autonomy. He is writing a book, which I am going to ask you about. And he runs a course called Autonomy, and he is a 9/11 whistleblower. Thanks for coming here, Richard. How are you doing? I'm guessing
I was
you're
trying
going
to
off
grab.
that book.
Well, now that I know you're going to pop quiz me on the book, I did have some printouts someplace over here on this. I have this. It used to be used. It used to be used to store records, like big albums. It's a big, like thin cabinet here, and then it came from John Taylor Gatto's apartment. And when we were moving the apartment out, I was like, "What can I use that for? I can use that to store all the documents that I might need to access." So. How you doing, Louis? Good to be here. Thank you for the invite. And at some point, if you pop quiz me, I'll show you some of the stuff that's unpublished.
I was just going to ask about your book that you were writing about the Rothschilds, the truth about the Rothschilds, as I did have a look before the interview to my due diligence and I couldn't see it published. So
it's not done yet.
How big is it going to be then?
Well, that's part of the problem, right? First off, I got invited by Stefan Molyneux to write a piece for him called, he was doing the Truth About series back in the day. It was like 10 years ago. And he wanted a piece called The Truth About the Rothschilds. So he said, Rich, I know you have all these books and you haven't published a book yet. Would you like to and I took it as, this is me starting to write a book. And they wanted an hour-long show. And I provided enough content for about 90 minutes. Mm-hmm. And then he ended up running into like some imperial program, issues. Maybe he felt that wasn't the safest thing for him to publish on. Maybe it was a little, over the top for the political climate in the day, these sort of things. So he never ended up publishing it. And so then I was left with all this, it was like a big outline. And then I was like, you know what? I could probably just make a whole book out of this because there's so much content. So then I ended up with like 100-page outline. And I was like, okay, I'm going to write a book because that's enough. If it's going to be a 200-page book, I got a 100-page outline. This will be easy. And then I got into the project of, I was making a film at the same time. I just become a dad at the same time. And I kicked off writing the book at the same time. Mm-hmm. Making a film and writing a book is no way to be a dad and bring in money. Yeah. So I realized I'd started two projects that were kind of like, if I follow through with those projects right now, I'm going to go out of business. I won't be able to support my family. So then I said, I need a bigger offer to the market. I'll back burner these so that they're done right. And then I don't have to compromise the integrity of those projects. Get into the Rothschild project. The outline, or not the outline, but the manuscript's probably about 400 pages now. So it's definitely out of one volume. It's already filled 2 volumes. So, and I haven't touched, I had a chapter for the Rothschilds in the 21st century, but they've done so much in the past 10 years, Louis, that needs to be almost its own volume too, right? And now I'm at the point where I'm considering maybe I don't need to finish the whole thing. Maybe I just go back, tighten up that first part of it and take it through the process, get it out, then do volume 2, which is pretty much already fleshed out. And then, have a rolling publication to make a whole series, like an encyclopedia. And in that encyclopedia set, right, on Western history, and, it starts out with the history of the Rothschilds. But when you get into what their story is, first off, they have a fascinating story, and there are so many great storytellers in their family. So I have these biographies and autobiographies and authorized, coverage from the writers who favored the family. But there's also some books out there from like 100 years ago that are a little bit more critical because they're not in on the narrative. So they're looking at it a little bit more objectively, right? And throughout all those books, you find out that the young Rothschild family, they're very much like the young Corleone family. They're doing hijackings. They're doing, black market sales of stolen goods and markets and all this sort of stuff, right? It's really interesting. And it's fascinating how Baron Philippe de Rothschild. So there's a book called Baron Philippe. It's got a burgundy cover. His wife was one of the big Balenciaga supporters back in the 60s. He's a very interesting, charismatic Rothschild. And what you notice is the story that he gets handed down is similar but different from his cousins and nephews and the other people who have written books. So when you get into all that, first off, it's fascinating. Secondly, nobody really knows any of this stuff. So you feel compelled to people need to know about this and point it out. And the next part is it connects into all the other parts of American history that you know about, or even, British history for you,
Yeah.
right? So it proliferates the last 250 years of our history, but it's not talked about. It's not pointed out. If people, if you bring it up, they'll say it's conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
But the way they hold people captive is they get you to turn off your critical thinking and get you to assume, and then that puts you in this circle. Let's call that circle the lie, because it's not the whole truth. And anything outside that circle is conspiracy theory. And if you don't grow outside that circle to incorporate into your sense of reality these elements, narratives, pieces of evidence, and artifacts that do exist and do tell a much more detailed, realistic part of the story, if you're not ever growing into that because you think it's all conspiracy theory, you're forever going to be held by those assumptions that formulate the lie. And
I mean,
that doesn't.
you can
So,
go on their website, and I mean, they
yeah.
talk about how they obviously help fund the Suez Canal for the British. They mention obviously their role in Wellington, and they have a big family, and didn't each of them have sort of a central bank in each European nation, and they had a really good networking system to communicate with each other, where obviously it was lent on in that purpose. And obviously there's the story about the gold. I mean, I've heard you speak about it. I haven't looked at it myself. Obviously there is speculation that, you'll be probably better telling the story of the gold and Wellington than me, because I'm not too familiar with it. So I would
I
back.
mean, well, let me, the gist of the story. I mean, if I could take a second, let me see if
Yeah.
I can just do this. I'm going to go to Rothschild
Yeah.
archive.org.
Yeah. But well, yeah, while you're doing that, the bit about Wellington and obviously the Battle of Waterloo, they have that on their mainline archives. That's not in dispute. It's the story about, did they lie about who won so they could buy all this gold and stuff. That's a bit more speculatory. But
Well,
they do obviously include the bit about Wellington on their website, and the Suez Canal, obviously different events.
I'm looking for the Rothschild timeline. They have various collections on here. You can see my screen, right?
Yeah. I actually have it open myself.
Yeah, but do you know how to screen share like this? That's the question.
I do. I should be able
Oh,
to
here it
do
is.
that on
I
Zoom.
got it. I found it. My problem is my reading monitor is out right now, and I'm looking at a far away monitor. It's harder to check it out. All right. So if you can see this on screen, this is rothschildarchive.org. This is their official timeline. And all these things that you were just mentioning that people think, oh, it's kind of conspiracy theory. Like it's all through here. So if we go to like 1812 time, let's see.
There you go.
They're helping, they're building their business, but they supply gold to Wellington. And here's the whole
Yeah.
paragraph about that. And then they have an English victory over Waterloo, and then they have a big influx of money for the family, and then they do a loan back to the Prussian government, which they just defeated. Now remember, the money that the Rothschilds used to battle Wellington came from Prussia in the first place, and it was sent to Nathan Rothschild as a protectorate during the time in the scourge of Napoleon. So there's all this interesting history that starts to play in there. But I just encourage people, just go read the timeline. And from there, you could dig into the private papers and the archives and all the evidence of this stuff. But this is them in their first person citing their family history. And I just, I don't have any aversion to it. I just think it should be better known.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for
I mean,
sure.
there's a lot of information on there. I haven't really even gone through it all myself, but
Well, that's your homework for next week, because if you take the time to go through it, let me get you back on screen. If you take the time to go back through it, you're going to see, you're like, oh, this is during the time of the Civil War, or this is the time of railroad building in America, or this is the time. So like in America, we have the 1849 San Francisco gold rush. Well, Rothschilds, they're in on the development of that. They're helping to provide infrastructure. They're helping to provide funding for towns. They're creating a bank called Wells Fargo. They also created a bank called Bank of America at one point, right? So these banks that we know today, Wells Fargo was to get the gold from California eventually back to the Royal Mint, which the Rothschilds had bought in 1828. So first they bail out Wellington, then they bail out the Bank of England, then they buy the Royal Mint, and then they become aristocrats.
Mhm.
And then if you watch the movie, the aristocrats, the Rothschilds, made by Hannah Rothschild, think she's like the niece of Jacob Rothschild. Like they'll tell you for a half hour, here's the history, but it's not proliferated outside. Like it's a very less than 1% of people on the planet have ever heard of that obscure documentary, which is easily found on
Yeah,
the
I
internet.
haven't heard of
Yeah,
it.
yeah. It's highly illustrative of what's going on.
Yeah, even obviously the Queen of England is now dead, but even this century, one of the Rothschilds was one of her financial advisors. So, and obviously, you still have Jacob Rothschild still,
Well, and that's what their role was in history was they were the court money changers for people
Mhm.
who come in out of town with different money, and Christians don't handle money or usury. That's been a historical position through hundreds and hundreds of years of history. So for Queen Elizabeth to still be working with this centralized banking family, not surprising. And
Yeah.
for Sir Evelyn de Rothschild, who just passed away recently, he's the
I think
father of
that was who it was, I think.
yeah, Sir Evelyn de Rothschild is the father, I believe, of David de Rothschild, who's the green Jesus out there who led the eco movement, but now is into like his current company is called Trustwise. I'm pretty sure that's it. And it has to do with collecting data from people during the pandemic to predict their activities, whether they're compliant or not. Very interesting stuff. Sir Evelyn de Rothschild, tall dude, is seen in the picture poking now King Charles III, poking that dude in the chest, right? And so it was a famous meme showing the relationship between the banking and the royalty. Now, to KC3's credit, Sir Evelyn de Rothschild died shortly after King Chucky III gets into power. So I thought that was also interesting too. Maybe that was natural, maybe it was a little blowback on that situation. But the inclusive banking movement that now is part of the Great Reset that involves the World Economic Forum, the Vatican, all the world's investable wealth, basically. That's Lady Lynn Forrester de Rothschild, who was married to Sir Evelyn de Rothschild.
Friends with the
She's
Clintons.
right.
Yeah.
She's besties with Hillary Clinton. She's
Yeah.
in the WikiLeaks. And if you just
Yeah.
search Rothschild in the WikiLeaks, you start to read their correspondence between each other. And then you look at who Lynn Forrester de Rothschild also funds and finances. James Alefantis and David Brock doing fundraisers for them back in the 2012s, 2010s, before certain other events. So there's a lot to that political economic milieu that I think has substantial influence on our society, but it's beyond what people are shown. People in America think former Vice President Biden's in control of stuff. They are inside that lie. The truth is out there. It's right outside that lie. They call it conspiracy theory, and if they stop making fun of things they don't know about, they might learn something.
I have a question that is kind of unrelated to what I wanted to talk about with Cecil Rose and onwards from there. Just because you mentioned Joe Biden on the street, people you meet, people you hear about. Obviously, I'm in Britain. Do people generally think he's in control? Not as I'm saying because he is a puppet like other presidents. I'm saying because he clearly has dementia or something of the sort. He can't speak properly. He's stumbling all the time.
Oh,
Do
you
people
see that too?
on the street generally believe, not that you have to believe he's a puppet of the bankers or whoever it may be, just from you, if that was your granddad and that was your birthday, you'd probably be a bit concerned, especially if he hadn't been drinking or anything.
100%, dude. I
Or-
wouldn't let former Vice President Biden run a J.C. Penney's, which is like a department store here. Like that would be too challenging. He couldn't do a shift at a Burger King.
yeah,
Okay?
that's the joke.
Yeah, that's the gist. So the people who believe that Biden is in control, they live in urban centers in this country. They vote Democrat. So those are blue areas predominantly. They call them blue areas. And because they live in a terrarium where they don't know where their food comes from, their water comes from, they're like kept people. They're like pets. So the pets vote for the people that feed them, the authority, without thinking. Now, people who live outside those cities, who might have to grow their own food, graze their own animals, do actual work, not in a terrarium, but in reality, they see through that real quick. They understand that that guy doesn't have the capacity to find his way off stage. He should not have access to a nuclear football or codes. But we on the outside, and I'm not a voting for president person here, right? Half this country does not vote for president. So now Republicans are one quarter, Democrats are one quarter, and there's another half of us that are like,
Yeah.
not being represented, so I'm not playing your game. There is no way the elected officials around here are representing my interests in any way, shape, or form. And when I have expressed my interest to them, they try to like give pushback because they're for collectivism, and that's how they got funding to be in place in the first place. So even on a like local level, those are the people actually enforcing mask mandates and lockdowns. They were the actual tyrants in all this stuff, right? We had a choice locally to say no, thank you, please. We'll do something different. But when you have like deep capture, and they've been doing this for years, it's all part of Agenda 21. So they have infiltrated and affected all the smaller government bodies. Even Soros went through the trouble to buy district attorneys in all these various areas to artificially proliferate agendas. And I'm not against his right to do that. I'm against the people being dumb enough to follow those things. So I try to educate people. Instead of saying Soros is the problem, hey, maybe all these weak-minded people who give Soros his power are the problem. Maybe all the people who take these things and don't push back are the problem. And so if we take it as a self-responsibility that if we improve ourselves, we can reflect these things and other people can do likewise. Because a lot of the people outside the conscious looking at the actual artifacts and research world, they're monkey see, monkey do. So we could set a better example for them. We can give them other responses beyond conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
And I always joke, like, why are you doing a job at the CIA? Well, what do you mean? Well, the conspiracy theory was not a pejorative prior to 1964. And then there's somebody asked me on Twitter, they're like, what's the evidence for that? I'm like, it's document 1035-960, countering criticism to the Warren Commission report. And it's all about Edward J. Epstein's book Inquest, which was looking into it. Now, an interesting part, because I had to reread that yesterday, because I wanted to point out it's in point 2, paragraph 2 of the paper, right? Like page 2, paragraph 2. And it's toward the end of the paragraph. But what it talks about in that paper also is that one of the biggest progenitors of JFK assassination conspiracy theories were the British and Bertrand Russell and all these stories. So there was a big, even though I would say at this point, the Queen had a hand in it. The first people to say it wasn't, the thing that they were saying in America was the people who had a hand in it, which is very clever. Just like in the document concerning countering criticism of the Warner Commission report, they cite specifically, some people are saying that Oswald worked for us. Oswald did work for them, most likely. How did he get into Russia? Like, there's no way to get into Russia. There's all these other documents. There's also a document that's still not released about how Oswald and the British were involved, and that document is still held secret. It exists. It was written. If it's bunk, why didn't you guys let us see it then? Right? So there are these things almost 60 years later after the event that are still held secret. And I always point out national security policy in Great Britain and the United Kingdom, 75 years. So if it goes 75 years, you might think maybe our other ally that trained the CIA how to do coups and assassinations had a hand in it. Of course they did. And the guy with the umbrella who says he's a Neville Chamberlain fan, like that's your Johnny on the spot. That's your James Bond character right there. But people don't want to see that because they're not allowed to link. They're not allowed to think outside the lie. Otherwise, they're conspiracy theorists. And that pejorative scares them because they don't know how to think their way past things. So if someone said conspiracy theorist, that tells me they're an intellectual featherweight. I should treat them with kid gloves because I would like them to get out of that. They do have the ability to learn if they have the courage to do it. And if I make fun of them, they're probably not going to do any learning. They're going to go further into their shell. So if I say something that's a fascinating hypothesis you have, how did you come up with that? Can you explain the step-by-step method from which you observed reality and came to your conclusion? Because I would like to adopt it, but I have standards. Do you have standards?
I always find it interesting with the word conspiracy when it's in legal terms. The court ruled there was a conspiracy to commit murder or whatever it may be. Then people, they
use it all the time.
They don't bat an eyelid. But as soon as you mention it outside of that, they're like, whoa. I'm like, well, if me and you, Richard, conspired, to blow up the Shell garage down, from my road, it's been called a conspiracy because it involves more than one person. You have to conspire.
To breathe together. That's
Yeah,
what it means.
if I blow up on my own, I didn't conspire with anyone. So this word that everyone's sort of scared of being called, it literally just means the act of conspiring. If a good example being MI6 and CIA conspired to overthrow the government of Iran in 1953.
Yeah,
As
Operation Ajax. Yeah,
a
100%.
legitimate conspiracy. So
So
it's strange. Yeah.
conspiracy is to talk together, to breathe together. Like conspire is like respire. You respiration, that's you breathing. Conspiration is you breathing with somebody else, and it can like in a way that breaks the law. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be violent. It just has to be like law breaking, right? That's conspiracy. Governments charge people with conspiracy all the time,
Ghislaine Maxwell.
and it's never a theory. Even though Ghislaine, she's in jail for trafficking to nobody.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's a conspiracy theory to talk about such things. It's a conspiracy theory to observe that Ghislaine's lawyer is now Samuel Bankman-Fried's lawyer, and that the firm that's going to defend is the firm that started the CIA in the first place. There's a lot of crossovers with Robert Maxwell's accounts in this whole FTX thing. It's a Democrat slush fund. It's the enterprise from Iran-Contra and BCCI. I mean, there's only so many slush fund market, black market, drug dealing, human trafficking, arms dealers out there. Yeah. They work together and they have networks over time, right? So conspiracy is almost never something the government is guilty of, but it's something the government uses to usually get rid of people catching on to its schemes.
Yeah, I mean, you can look back at conspiracy in history. You can go to the just forgotten it. One would be the assassination of Lincoln because it involved more than one people. What's the plot that happened in Britain that led to Firework Night? What was it?
The gunpowder plot with Guy Fawkes, November 5th, back in the day.
Yeah, well,
he's a socialist or something, though, right? Wasn't he like he's not for freedom?
I'm not there to comment on that. I'm just saying because it involved a lot of people to blow up Parliament. That is obviously a conspiracy. The reason the JFK assassination isn't considered a conspiracy not is because it has to be the CIA. It's because it was a lone gunman. If there was two, Oswald and his brother, if he had one.
This is an excellent point.
Would be a conspiracy, wouldn't it?
All right, so there's multiple ways to handle this. First off, Oswald likely worked in CIA and maybe even Office of Naval Intelligence. He might have been an Office of Naval Intelligence spy to get into the CIA to rat out the people on the inside of the CIA who were loyal to the British. Okay,
Alan Dulles.
It's called the Office of Policy Coordination. It's Dulles Allen and Dulles John Foster, State Department insertion into CIA that does the work of the British. This is a well-known fact that was going on, and Alan Dulles was a spy for the British since 1916. So he's not a good guy to have in this. But when you see him presiding over Kennedy's death, he's there. He's the Queen's man on the scene to make sure that all goes away. Now, Oswald is alleged to have shot Kennedy as a lone gunman in using a Mannlicher Carcano, a rifle that doesn't exist. There is no such rifle. There's a Carcano rifle, and there's a Mannlicher clip magazine, and they use that as propaganda to bring in Nazis and fascists into the mind of Americans. And that this guy's a communist, Nazi, fascist, right? They paint him with a little triangle with he's a communist using a Nazi fascist weapon. But the first weapon identified at the scene is a Mauser, a German Mauser, and it was found by a Dallas police officer who had fought in World War II and knew the difference between an Italian shitty rifle for $12 and a German Mauser that he had killed people with, right? Like he had killed people that were shooting at him with that, right? He's seen it. That gets wiped away from the narrative. And then Jack Ruby shoots Oswald on Sunday. Kennedy, I think, gets killed Thursday, right? Oswald gets killed Sunday. Jack Ruby shoots Oswald. Jack Ruby's visited in the hospital, in jail by Lewis, Jolly, and West, like number 2 MK Ultra CIA spook, scientist, psychotherapist, LSD experimenter, mind control expert. That's a little weird for Jack Ruby to be visited by that specific guy, so that's interesting. And then you've got on the Sunday, you also have a memo written by, I don't know if he was acting attorney general or what his position was, but he's a legal dude, and he's a Rhodes Scholar named Nicholas Katzenbach. and if you look up the Katzenbach memo, you'll see the official narrative comes from his typewriter. You know, he's like, here's what's going to happen. Here's what the Warren Commission is going to tell you eventually. Yeah. And from there, the setup is, so that Katzenbach memo is like Philip Zelikows' outline for the 9/11 Commission report before they did the research. He comes in and is like, here's the results. Here's what we're going to find. Now go out and find the stuff that makes this narrative a fact. And Philip Zelikows' PhD qualification for doing such things, 9/11 Commission, very important commission. He did his PhD on the creation of public myths. So you might want to check into these things. Like Alan Dulles said, the American public doesn't read. Otherwise, they'd figure out sooner that the CIA and MI6 killed JFK. I wouldn't even put the Mossad out of it at that point. There was a axe to grind, and the three people holding that axe all were standing on the same hill. I don't know. The mafia is a useful tool in that, and it's extravagant and shiny, and it gets people. It's like a red herring. It's like, go follow Giancana. It was the mafia. It was, Carlos so-and-so. Is like, there's a lot of layers to it. All those layers performed as an orchestra on cue, and anybody who didn't go along with it disappeared. What did E. Howard Hunt? What did he say on his deathbed confession? He said he was part of the team that killed Kennedy. And he's also, so when he's breaking into Watergate 10 years later, that's part of the Kennedy cover-up. And the people who killed Kennedy rose to power. And that can be seen through H.W. Bush to W. Bush to Skull and Bones investigating BCCI to Skull and Bones versus Skull and Bones in 2004 for president. The people with the secret society that run drugs and narco terrorism and a whole bunch of slush funds assassinated a sitting American president, and they got away with it. They all rose to power. No one got prosecuted. They still are in power to this day. It's not the same people. They got a second generation of liars in there, of thieves. But you're not going to get freedom back until people can look at these things objectively and say, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't trust Mike Pompeo and all these other CIA directors who are saying it came from the wet market. Or they said Hunter Biden's laptop is fake. Mm-hmm. When they all say something like that in concert, maybe they're lying. They're professional liars.
Well, we have obviously the clip of Mike Pompeo literally saying the CIA, we lied, we cheated, we stole.
He made a course on it. He brags. He's like, I made a course on it.
And then, the crowd starts laughing.
What's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses. It reminds you of the glory of the American experiment.
I mean, American officials are quite strange compared to British in their sort of arrogance of, like John Bolton being on CNN and openly saying he's planned coup d'etats or calling for regime change. I'm not saying obviously British officials don't, during the Iraq war or whatever may push for it, but American officials, even the fact when you killed Soleimani, Trump, coming out just saying, we killed him, it was great, we're proud of it, we meant to care about sovereignty and democracy, and we airstriked, Soleimani in Iraq, and he's Iranian, and just come out and say it. Rather, the British would probably not come out and say it. No,
they probably would. That's how the Americans are getting so bold as to just come out and say it now, because
maybe true.
Like the British trained the Americans on the bombing of Dresden and like the firebombing of the German cities, and that set them up to be able to drop the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These were not American elements, but hanging out with the British and overthrowing these countries later and doing all this sort of stuff all comes back from, just a little step over the line, right? Just a little step over the line. Yes. And think of it like this. If the Anglo-American establishment didn't really have control of the United States until after World War II, right? They get their planning together in World War I. By World War II, their special relations shipped up. All our intelligence is their intelligence, right? If you don't have that happen, America's on a very different tack for the 20th century. There's no imperialism. There's no bases overseas. There's no Afghanistan war. There's no Iraq war. It wouldn't be going on. but hanging out with people who are like, hey, can you manage these bases for us? We'll do a Bases for Destroyers Act. Why don't you take all these overseas bases? You'll find them useful. And America became the property managers for the British Empire.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
it was literally like a relay race. Obviously, the
right.
British they're running out of steam, but we're like, we'd be your junior partner. You
It's
just
like body
get
swapping.
yeah.
It's like one of those horror movies where the old person puts himself inside the young person, right? So now America comes out and it's doing all this type of coups and imperialism, and then they get to the JFK thing, and they get a group of people inside America to say, "Hey, we think your president needs to go," and they're like, "Yeah, we'll help you." Okay, so now whoever participated in JFK's killing, they've got the drop on America because they know the truth and the public's been told a lie. So whoever's in power can be blackmailed. So by the time USS Liberty comes around in 1967, LBJ, who was in on the whack of JFK, he has to bend over and say, go ahead, take the Golan Heights. Go ahead, scuttle the USS Liberty, kill our soldiers. We won't investigate or say anything about it, because if we do, you're going to blow the lie about JFK. And
Do you
from
not think
there,
it's also just a genuine convergence of interest, and they all have,
yes,
skeletons on their in their closet, so they're never really gonna expose the big thing. So they're normally working in interest of each other. Like obviously, you could say, the British are now, they're on the lead of the Americans, but it could just be they actually just have a genuine convergence of interest on the Iraq War, on the Afghanistan War. Except now America is obviously the top dog who say if the British did blow up Nord Stream 2, they would have had to ask the Americans permission, and most likely they probably maybe did it together, or whatever it was, whether it was Ukraine or who knows, but
they're in it together,
the
thick
Americans.
as thieves, dude. And so this convergence of interest that you're citing, right? So let's say that there's a group called the British Empire, and they had their eyes on America, and let's say there's a group called the Zionists, and they had their eyes on Palestine. And let's say that there was a convergence of interest in the form of a document, a contract called the Balfour Declaration.
Yeah.
And the Balfour Declaration starts out with Lord Rothschild writing to the British government saying, hey, how about you give me Palestine? And it ends with the British government writing him a letter saying, here's Palestine. So it's a receipt for a transaction. Now, what did the Zionists have to put in on their side? Well, maybe they'll get America in the war on the side of the British and not the Germans, because 30% of America is coming from Germany at that time. And maybe they'll help do a little propaganda campaign and these sort of things. And then the British do get America into the war because of the Lusitania, which they knew about the sinking of, and they had already verified. Hey, if the Lusitania sinks, well, you got to get into the war. And the word comes back, yes. And like a half hour later, it's sunk by the Wolfpack. So
would you be able to get? I know you have Colonel House's papers. Do you have them handy where you could show that quote? If not, I'll put
I
it up
do.
on the screen.
I do. So I don't know if I can source that quote as
Okay.
handily, but I could show you both sides of the conversation, because I have Colonel House's private papers published by Charles Seymour of Yale University, 1924, 4-volume set. I also have Lord Grey's papers, and those were the two interacting with the King of England on this topic. So you read from both sides, and these books were presented in Corbett's World War I Conspiracy. Yeah. That's how the public knows them. So let me grab one of each.
Yeah, if you don't find it, I can get it up on the screen after I actually had it ready, because I didn't think this might come up.
I can show you what they look like. I just don't know if I can unwrap and find them. All right, so this is Lord Grey's. It's called 25 Years, 1892 to 1916, Grey of Followdon. This is volume 1. There's this little signature. Here's about his death. This book came with a thoughtful cutout in here, which is kind of a good pun, because these people.
When did this book come out?
I'm looking right here. Here is Sir Edward Grey. Let me get my mouse off that screen. Sir Edward Grey, 25 Years, Volume 1, and MCM XX, 1925.
So basically a year off.
Let me check my Roman numeral reading. Yeah, 1925. First edition. So let me see if there's a bookmark in here for that. No, it's probably in volume 2, because it starts out in the early 1900s. So if I went to volume 2, I would probably find one of those. But here is Colonel House's. You notice it's very similar. these guys who get their papers printed on, different sides of the ocean, but very similar. They got their signature on the front, The Intimate Papers of Colonel House by Charles Seymour. And let's see if I recalled 1924 correctly. This is Behind the Political Curtain, 1912 to 1915. This is a 4-volume set. Oh, look at this. Who's this quote by? House longed to get good accomplished and was content that others should have the credit. Viscount Grey of Followdon. We were just reading his private papers. Oh, these guys are they're intimate private papers. You might get in some letters in here that tie into bigger topics. But let's see. He turned to Woodrow Wilson. Let's see what letters these are. You can tell from what date, right? So this is 1911 in this one. So I would have to get to the ones around 1917. But I do have many pages marked in here. A lot of interesting conversations around the creation of the Federal Reserve Act, talking to Paul Warburg, right?
Yeah.
Now, it was Paul Warburg. I think it was his son who said you'll have world government whether you like it or not. But this is the one from the creation of the Federal Reserve. He's corresponding with J.P. Morgan Jr. because Jack Morgan died the year before. So the father died the year before. So this is Junior. So it's interesting to read the correspondence of the people who consider themselves your betters and the non-elected people who rule the world. So there's a whole lot of pages in this one, but I'm suspecting the ones I used for Corbett were in like volume 4.
That quote was James Warburg, Paul Warburg's son. I think he said, "We will have world government, whether by consent or by conquest." I think that's what it was.
Oh yeah, there you go. That's a good version of the quote. That's more detailed than what I recall.
I think it's in it was in a congressional hearing as well, and he said that. So I wonder what that would have been like live in time when he gets up and says, "We have world government, whether by consent or conquest."
I guess all those smart people who could have yelled conspiracy theory, they weren't there that day. So otherwise they would have, and they would have put an end to that rumor and that misinformation that people want world government. I'm like, I could probably show you 100 books that they're like, we would like world government.
No. I've got a selection of quotes on my website. Actually, kind of want to go back because we kind of end up doing it the wrong way around. I wanted to speak to you about Cecil Rhodes, the Round Table Group, CFR. I'm not sure whether we might be better to maybe save that for another day and sort of continue maybe around World War II time. The irregulars and
sure. So that's a whole
Center. Obviously, the British. What was the organization called? They was in Rockefeller Center.
Oh, the irregulars. The Baker Street Irregulars was a Conan Doyle idea from Sherlock Holmes. These spies fashioned themselves because I think they even worked out of Baker Street just as for shits and giggles, right? So they considered themselves the irregulars. These were like the asymmetrical warfare spies, saboteurs. Ian Fleming was one of them. Roald Dahl, who wrote Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Willy Wonka, the creator, like he's a spy. And they all went to assassination training camp during World War II and at Camp X and at what is now Camp David, the presidential retreat, used to be an assassination training camp. So these Englishmen came over to America and then they got stationed in various areas of political persuasion, public persuasion, these sort of areas. And they had, like David Ogilvy, I think he's one of the biggest ad firm creators in America, but he's also a British spy during World War II. Specifically, the English were making sure America didn't get into the side of the Germans in World War II. So this was a constant concern. You can't get America back if they start siding with the other side of the British royal family, because it's all German royal family that went over and took Britain, and then they're fighting to kill off their cousins in World War I. They do so successfully. That's the great game. And then they want to play the new great game with their cousins in America and take over the rest of the world. They've been doing that for the past 70 years.
Yeah, there was the 3 cousins, and just to clarify for people listening, so World War I, you have who is the one from King? Would it be King George? And then it's the Tsar's wife, and then the Kaiser are all cousins because they're all grandchildren of Queen Elizabeth, and the Kaiser was especially close, I think, with
Queen Victoria. They were all grandchildren. They were all grandchildren of Victoria. And the movie, The King's Man, the sequel to it, they show you this history. They show those kids playing in a room, and Queen Victoria comes in to see her grandchildren. They're all playing war with each other, and then they grow up and they play war for real with each other.
I mean, I always find it funny. Like most siblings and cousins would, fighting for the remote in the living room, but they've got a World War, Russia, Britain.
Yeah, they end up controlling social media sites that are controlling the world when they grow up. It'd be hilarious.
And they're all cousins. It's bizarre to think about. I mean, yeah, I don't know how you even get to that point. I guess that's just a sign of the crazy times of history and how it's continued. But yeah, I always found that really interesting. But yeah,
so the gist of your answer on Cecil Rhodes is it should be our next talk, right? That because it warrants its whole conversation. Because basically, Cecil Rhodes creates a lot of wealth, but he's funded by the Rothschild family to create that wealth, and then he points it back at creating a secret society to take America and put it back in the British Empire, and creating Rhodes scholarships to anglicize the world on this agenda. And in America, we have a lot of people taking anti-American activities, and no one sees their Rhodes scholars. They're all over the place. Bill Clinton, George Stephanopoulos, Robert Reich. There's all these people that are talking out and pushing agendas. Rachel Maddow, big TV presenter here in the States. These are all Rhodes Scholars proliferating their agenda. Now, not all Rhodes Scholars are in deep with the pederast Cecil Rhodes and pushing the agenda for world domination. Some of them just thought they were getting a good education.
Yeah, it's going to Oxford.
And because they probably weren't judged to be primed to accept the agenda, they were never told about it, right? So you'd have like Naomi Wolf here in America, who's a Rhodes Scholar, but she's very well informed. She's anti getting experimental treatments without informed consent. All these sorts of positions that would be antithetical to the collectivist grooming of the New World Order.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You can't just say, obviously, just because they're a Rhodes Scholar, they're in with the plan. Some people just want to go to Oxford, and it's the same thing as people from Britain going to Harvard or whatever it may be.
Sure, or Yale or Princeton. I mean, our Ivy League schools are the schools that the king had set up here. So Princeton and Reuters used to be Queen's College. Columbia used to be King's College. Then there's William and Mary College. So all these types of colleges. Yale was started by Elihu Yale, who worked for the East India Company and helped to use that opium money to make a really nice place. The Harvard people were getting money from the Eastern establishments, opium monopoly, working with the British, because there's families in America that never stopped being loyal to the British. You can call them the Eastern establishment, the Boston Brahmins, bringing that caste system from British conquest of India over here to America. And there's quite a list of prodigious families in America. Because I went through, I don't know if I had, let's see if it works. I went through the Boston Brahmins at one point, and I took a look to see, like, who are these families and what do they do? Well, it's like all the founding families of what we know as America.
When you say Boston Brahmin, what can you just explain what that is?
Yeah, so it's a elite family-oriented group of people, establishment families in America. So Brahmin it's like an Americanization of a caste system. These are the first families of Boston, from which Colonel House and the Dulleses and all these other people eventually trickle down from.
But that includes like the Astors. Obviously, they got Germans, British.
Well, the Astors were German and British. Then they came to America, expanded their fur trade. They take the furs over, trade them for opium, and then come back. Because I've seen the ship manifests of the Astors.
Britain still has an Astor I actually checked before this.
That's the Cliveden set. The Astors in the British side, there's the Cliveden set. Over here in America, it's called the Georgetown set. They are the trickle down from these families, right? So like Ben Bradley, a big journalist back in the day for like the establishment, he's part of that pedigree family. The Cabot family, the Choate family, House's family, the Delano Roosevelt family. Both of those families up in the opium trade back in the day.
And
the
you have
Peabody, Perkins.
You have Forbes, and obviously that's John Forbes Carey, who did the BCCI. He ran against George W. Bush in 2004, both from the same Skull and Bones fraternity. I think they're only like a year different in age. And then obviously, he's in the Biden administration. He's the one who obviously got caught on tape when he was Secretary of State under Obama, saying they watched ISIS grow. They thought they could use it as leverage against Assad, but then, Russia came in.
Let me ask you, Michael. I mean, I think we've been putting an extraordinary amount of arms in, haven't we?
Yeah, and I have to say, as you said, it's a double-edged sword, because you give people the ability to defend themselves. But when you pump more weapons into a situation like Syria, it doesn't end well for Syrians, because there's always somebody else that's willing to pump more weapons in for the other side. The armed groups in Syria get a lot of support, not just from the United States, but from other partners. And we've never said that
Qatar, Russia, Qatar, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, huge amount of weapons coming in. Huge amount of money.
But pumping weapons in causes someone else to pump more weapons in, and you end up with Aleppo.
I mean, the reason Russia came in is because ISIL was getting stronger. Daesh was threatening the possibility of going to Damascus and so forth. And that's why Russia came in, because they didn't want a Daesh government. And they supported Assad. And we know that this was growing. We were watching. We saw that Daesh was growing in strength, and we thought Assad was threatened. We thought, however, we could probably manage, that Assad might then negotiate. Instead of negotiating, you got Assad. Now you got Putin to support him.
And I think he's your climate envoy now for Biden. So he's been around a long time. But yeah, his middle name is Forbes, which I didn't know myself till a year ago.
And it came to it came through the opium. So prior to the opium, you just had the people that came over on the Mayflower, and you had some pilgrims in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. But then as the East India Company created and picked up momentum in late 1700s into the early 1800s, all these families became immensely wealthy. And there are these huge mansions in Rhode Island. And these were like, it was a big trading port for slaves and products and all sorts of other things that went on out there. So these are families traditionally that didn't mind making their money in ways that weren't like on the up and up, right? And they're taking money from bankers who also don't mind supplying such, operations. So like the Perkins family, a bunch of these families go into, here's John Murray Forbes. He's also part of into that family's business. And this is where the opium, the skull and bones, the secret societies, and America's secret family power structure. And that is the power structure, ironically, that was behind the people who killed JFK. Because when you get into the Georgetown set, all the people that Carroll Quigley was working with were like, he's writing Tragedy and Hope, and it comes out in 1966. He was around the people who killed Kennedy in 63. I think that's part of the reason he got the book out and wants, to move on.
Because just to let people know, Carroll Quigley wrote Tragedy and Hope. He also wrote The Anglo-American Establishment, where he talks about the Round Table Group who came from Cecil Rhodes. He was also the Harvard teacher of Bill Clinton, and Bill Clinton name checks him in his first speech as president, I think, 1993, where he says Carroll Quigley, was one of the most influential people, on his life, which is interesting because, again, Bill Clinton's obviously a Rhodes scholar.
Student at Georgetown, I heard that call clarified by a professor named Carroll Quigley, who said to us that America was the greatest nation in history because our people had always believed in two things: that tomorrow can be better than today, and that every one of us has a personal moral responsibility to make it so.
So I don't know what to make of that, whether people obviously believe that secret society carry on to exist from Cecil Rhodes. It's interesting to see Bill Clinton literally name check Carroll Quigley and one other person in his first presidential speech, considering he's a Rhodes scholar. And I'm sure it's familiar with.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why he got chosen to rise to power, right? Now, I say Americans' Eastern establishment families and power structure here in this brain model thought And you might say, where'd you get this? This Eastern establishment? Oh, Edith Kermit Roosevelt, a newspaper columnist and granddaughter of Teddy Roosevelt. And I think she's the sister of Kermit Roosevelt, who worked with MI6 to overthrow Operation Ajax in Iran, right? She had this whole quote, and I don't have the ability to see it and read it right now and see you on screen. But in this quote, she illustrates, she's like, oh, here's how it works. So it's not a conspiracy theory. This is just somebody being literate of things. This is like how they refer to themselves. This is something that if you brought this up, they would know what you're talking about. You could read a book like The Power Elite by C. Wright Mills. This is what he's talking about. There is a non-elected Eastern elite establishment of rulers that interact with their former British counterparts and have very much mended that wound from the American Revolution, and everything's just one now, so that they can have world government.
You can even I'll put this in the show notes as much as I can. You'll enjoy this one. FDR, where he sends a telegram, an email, whatever it was, to Colonel Howe saying, as you much know, there's been a financial elite who have owned the government since Andrew Jackson, which, he was the president in the 1860s. And then you have FDR's son-in-law write a book where he says, I had a lot of faith for my father-in-law, and then I realized he was in with the one welders and the bankers who wanted, one world government. Again, there's a collection of people who mention world government, whether you want to believe it exists. I'm open to not, continuing to plan, but there's not a shortage of people literally quoting about wanting a one world government or a new world order. And I mean, even like the other day, I know you'll be familiar with the Abu Dhabi have it's called a world government summit, and they had obviously someone speak about the new world order, and
then they got fact checked.
Are they just trying to fuck with people there? Like, if you're called the World Government Summit and then you literally have a topic on the new world order in 2022, like, are they just trying to mess with people? Get people talking about it, and people are like, oh, it's crazy. I don't know. Again, I'll put it in the show.
I think they're just saying it out in the open because they don't know that they're not supposed to say it yet. This is The New Freedom by Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah.
Prior to him going and becoming president. This is published in 1913 in London. This is the second edition, I think. Yeah, but it's the first London edition.
Yeah, I know with this.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to show that there's a quote that's often attributed to being specious, and that's because it's hard to paraphrase 8 pages. So I'll just read the first part. This is from page 12. He doesn't wait long until he gets into it. Since I have entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confided to me privately. Some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere, so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. They know that America is not the place of which it can be said, as it used to be, that a man may choose his own calling and pursue it just so far as his abilities enable him to pursue it. Because today, if he enters certain fields, there are organizations which will use means against him that will prevent him from building up a business which they don't want to have built up. Organizations that will see to it that the ground is cut from under him and the markets shut against him. If he begins to sell certain retail certain retail dealers to any retail dealers, the monopoly will refuse to sell to those dealers, and those dealers are afraid to buy the man's wares. It goes on and on for like 8 pages. So I understand why people want to debunk that quote and say it's not real, but to say he's not really talking about that topic in that way is disingenuous to Dr. Woodrow Wilson from Princeton University. So
yeah, he said that before he's president. So
he said that before the Federal Reserve too.
Yeah.
He knew. So when he says I've unwittingly ruined my country, et cetera, if that's a real quote, I have yet to find it. But, there are these, so they circulate paraphrasings instead of the actual factual. And then people say, well, that's debunked. And then it's like, well, did you actually get the book and read? Because it's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, I just realized obviously you've got your call, so I'm guessing we're probably gonna have to finish up here.
I do. I gotta hop. I got Joshua and I have a discovery call with a new client, and we're excited. He wants to sell his business, so it's a good. good call to go to.
Right, well, I'll let you jump on that, but it was a fun conversation.
We left your audience wanting for next time, and hop on my schedule for Q1, and we'll do this again because you had a responsible, thorough, substantial use of my time today. Thank you for helping me leverage it, Louis. And send me a link when this comes out, and I'll help you share it.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on, Richard. I appreciate it, and I'll let you jump on your call.
All right, thanks. Peace.
Thank you. See you later.
GrandTheftWorld.com.